Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to continue hearing evidence from Mr. Richard Harral, formerly of the DCLG. So I'm going to ask Mr. Harral to come back in. Good morning, Mr. Harral.
Good morning, sir.
Are you ready to carry on?
Yes, I wonder if I can make a short statement to clarify some of my, on reflection, clarify some of my testimony from yesterday.
Yes, what do you want to say?
In negotiating my way to be able to give testimony to the inquiry, I've dealt with some quite serious mental health issues, which have meant that I've not been able to engage with a lot of the documentation that has emerged since I gave my witness statement. And in some of the testimony yesterday, on reflection, I recognised that I have gone beyond what I recollect and have made statements on certain areas that I would like to correct, if possible. Specifically, the extent of my recollection of my knowledge of A2 limited combustibility requirements and Class 0 requirements in the period before the fire. I cannot, on reflection last night, I cannot identify specific memories of what my level of knowledge was at that time, and I think I misrepresented that yesterday, for which I apologise. Again, I think in trying to form a picture of my understanding at the time of reviewing ADB 4 in 2015, my recollection, thinking it through last night, is much vaguer than that I gave yesterday. And I would like to help the inquiry to kind of clarify that if possible. And in terms of a statement I gave around a question about general competence yesterday, I wanted to add that, I have reflected every day since the fire on my role, and I recognise that in the time that I was in post, I did not have sufficient knowledge and competence to make the difference that perhaps I should have done. And so I just wanted to add that to the statement of where I thought my competence was, but I just wanted to be transparent on those issues with the inquiry.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I mean, I think we all recognise the difficulty when you're asked to recollect events that occurred several years ago, and particularly when you're asked to tell us about your knowledge or understanding at that time, how difficult it is to separate that from what you've learned since as a result of going over the documents. And that's obviously a difficulty. But thank you for clarifying those matters, and we shall obviously take them into account, yes.
Well, I hope that's helpful in making the rest of my testimony useful.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Grange.
Yes, thank you. Yes, good morning, Mr. Harral. Yes, just to reassure you, I am going to be going over, as probably the main part of my questioning today, looking at what you did and didn't know based on the emails about matters such as, combustible cladding, issues to do with Class 0, things like that. So we'll go back over that. So you'll get the chance to consider that again and make sure that the testimony you're giving is entirely accurate.
Can I just interject to say this before Ms. Grange starts putting questions to you? I think, again, we all also understand how reliving some of these things can be difficult. And if you feel at any stage you would like to have an additional break, you've only got to say that.
Thank you very much.
And we shall do it.
Thank you.
All right?
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Grange.
Okay, thank you. I want to pick the chronology back up that we were looking at and look at February 2017 now and an exchange of emails that occurred then. If we can go to CLG 1308896. And I want to pick it up at the bottom of page 2. there is an email from you dated the 9th of February at 9:21 at the bottom of the page. And we can see it says importance high, subject, sub-building regs discussion document, WA clearance. And you say all, please see redrafted discussion document sub. We are recommending that we talk minister through proposals before proceeding to write around. And then you ask for certain things to be clarified. And just to be clear, we can see that goes to a number of people, including Brian Martin and Bob Leadsom. So we can see that you've got a redrafted discussion document, and it's recommended that you talk ministers through the proposal before proceeding to write around. And we just finish off looking at that email, just go over to the top of page 3. All, can you give this one last look to ensure it's factually correct? Aim is for this to be on Gavin's desk, so this is going to be Gavin Barwell. When he gets back from recess, deadline Monday the 12 noon, please. And then in the next email up the chain on page 2, we can see at 9:27, Mr. Martin just responds to you saying this: Richard, I redrafted the Part B para following our chat with Simon and Steve. The 2013 coroner's report on the fire at Lakanal House fire criticised the clarity of the guidance on Part B, fire safety, and in response to this, the then Secretary of State, Eric Pickles MP, committed to review it. There are regular calls on the government to set out when and how this work will be taken forward. We have constrained the proposed scope of the review of Part B to areas of highest priority, but the fire lobby is powerful and there will be pressure to do more. So there, Mr. Martin seems to be explaining to you some of the background to Lakanal House and what the intention is in terms of taking areas of highest priority forward in Part B. Then if we go to the next email in the chain, here we have at the top of page 2, again on the 9th of February, you back to him. You say, cheers, Brian, is it worth mentioning that we've already made some progress on this? See below. And you therefore suggest an amendment to the paragraph that he's suggested. Actually, it's clear now. So he's suggesting a paragraph for the ministerial submission, and what you're doing then in red is adding a suggested addition to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you remember this at the time? Does this help?
I don't recall it now, I'm sorry.
So we can see the blue text, as we read before, from Brian Martin, and then we've got, in the second line, your suggestion in red. We have already made significant progress in redrafting the specific areas highlighted by the coroner, but now need to consult on these with industry. So that was your suggestion. And I think, is it right? It says, I read progress. Should that have read progress?
Yes, it should have done, yes.
Yeah, rather than significant process. And then looking at the very bottom of page 1, there's an email timed at 9:36. Brian Martin replies to you and he says, maybe significant is pushing it a bit. It suggests we've nearly finished. I wouldn't want to imply that a quick consultation exercise will be all that's needed. How about... We've started work on a redraft as recommended by the coroner, but we will need to work with industry to take this further. Do you see that?
I do.
And then you reply, you say this, you say, fine, the point is that we haven't been sitting on our hands on this, brackets, Steve's concern, close brackets. Now, was Steve Quartermain?
It would be, yes.
So you're keen to emphasise at this point, is this right, that you haven't been sitting on your hands in relation to this Part B review, yes?
That's exactly what the email says, yes.
Right. If you hadn't been sitting on your hands, what would you say was an accurate description of what had been occurring with this stream of work?
Well, I think from the timeline we've been through, it's clear that it was subject to a whole series of delays.
Yeah.
And one of the difficulties with work planning is that you create dependencies on certain actions being taken. And when they don't happen, it's very difficult to then reposition. You know, if you've started something in train, it's very difficult to then pull that back and reallocate or restructure the way that you're planning to do things, particularly if there are very singular processes that have to be followed. That's delayed our ability to have the engagement we wanted, and that's slowed down the process of taking it forward. I think by that stage we'd done quite a complicated exercise of restructuring the 2 volumes of ADB. I think that there was progress in looking at the clarity of the drafting, but we needed that industry engagement to actually help us tell us how to actually make it easier for them to use.
Right, okay. So then we see Brian Martin's response, just up from that. It's at the top of this page that you're looking at now. And he says, I hear what you are saying, but I'm pretty sure the department's upper echelons have sat on my hands for the last 18 months, ! Smiley face. Do you see that?
I do.
Did you agree with Mr. Martin's comment there that the department's upper echelons had sat on his hands for the last 18 months?
I believe I do. I have seen this email chain more recently, and I know that I did agree with that. I believe. I think that if we scroll up, I think my response is that I think that I think the department may have forgotten about us completely. I saw something to that effect.
Yeah, I'll go to your response in a minute. I'm just interested in as to whether you agreed that the department's upper echelons had sat on Brian Martin's hands for the last 18 months.
I was beginning to think at that time, and I've already effectively resigned from the civil service at this point, in frustration at not being able to get on with work or the stress of trying to actually deal with the repercussions of that prioritization. At that time, I was starting to think that there was a risk that there was some form of concerted effort to slow this process down so that we would be available to go into another cycle of just pure deregulation to deal with the department's budgets. And I don't have evidence for that, but I do remember it starting to be a real concern. There was at least one subsequent event that made me feel that the department's commitment to this work was, and the planning directorate's commitment to this work was a problem, not just lacking, but actually somehow actively problematic in
Right.
that.
And in short, very briefly, what was that subsequent event?
So 3 weeks before the result of the general election, or sometime in May, so it's a couple months later, Bob Ledsman sat me down and told me that the majority, if not the bulk, of the funding that had been allocated to the investigation of real fires contract and a flexible analytical support contract that we had procured, which was, frankly, our only way to properly resource the work we needed to do,
Yeah.
were being reallocated to fill a black hole in the planning budget.
Right.
And that left me, again, I was furious for many reasons about that.
Yeah. And just briefly, the upper echelons, who did you understand Mr. Martin to be referring to there when he talks about the upper echelons of the department?
I think we'd started to form a view, and again, there's a subsequent discussion that would suggest this may be true, that the prioritisation policies in the department were just consistently working against us. We were always at the back of the queue for briefings when the administration's changed. We were already, lower priority by far for submissions getting up to ministers. And I think a few weeks after the Grenfell Tower fire, I remember meeting a member of the Secretary of State's private office. We bumped into each other. I didn't know them very well. We'd met in a few meetings on a particular area of policy, but he was a good person and we'd kind of connected. I'm afraid I can't remember his name.
Okay.
And we talked about how we were both doing in the aftermath, because it was obviously a very intense period. But unprompted, I recall him saying to me, something along the lines of private offices really need to get together after this and do some serious thinking about how we've been prioritising the department's work.
Right, yes. Thank you. Now, you reply to this, if we go one email up, so it's the second email down now on the page, at 9:52, you say, they're not even aware your hands exist to sit on. Let's just agree to gild lilies where necessary. Do you see that?
I do.
Now, what did you mean by the first sentence? Why were they not aware that Brian Martin had hands that existed to sit on?
It's me just expressing my frustration with a sense that we have no priority at the top of the department.
Right.
I mean, our engagement with director-level civil servants was, it was sporadic because they were very busy. But we didn't have any engagement with civil servants above that grade. I certainly didn't in that period at all. And we're feeling that we're always the back of the queue, frankly.
Okay. And then you say, let's just agree to gild lilies where necessary. What did you mean by gilding lilies?
So I think that there may be some other emails on this. But I think Simon Gallagher had told me to tweak the discussion document and some of the other information to make it more palatable for Right Around, or to help us get clearances to publish matters. And I reviewed, we did this through the summer of 2016. We were trying to, the core of the discussion document, what we needed to say to industry, didn't really change, but we were having to realign the argument for doing it to the government's broader policy to enable us to get Right Around clearance. And that's what I meant by gilding lilies. It's basically taking the argument for why this is necessary and making it appear, trying to find ways to make it appear more attractive to the rest of government and to ministers to a degree.
I see. I mean, if that's what you meant, isn't that rather an odd phrase? Because that phrase conventionally means trying to improve something that's already beautiful or excellent.
I've obviously misinterpreted that for my entire life. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
I would quite, if I'd known that, I'd have used that interpretation instead.
It is what you meant. Let's
it's
put a gloss
yes,
on this.
That's right.
But a gloss that perhaps we don't agree with, but a gloss that's going to make it more palatable for ministers.
Well, not just for ministers, but more importantly for Right Around clearances, because obviously we would need to get approval from HM Treasury and Cabinet Office and Number 10 and a number of other government departments who had an interest. And the business department's very interested in regulation because they run policy on that. So it's about, and it's a perfectly genuine concern. It's just frustrating because, there's another week gone, another 2 weeks gone whilst you change something and then get it cleared again.
Yeah. But just to be clear, very clear what you were changing, is what you're saying that you were changing it to make it more consistent with their deregulatory agenda? Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't know. The discussion document had a front end that positioned it, as far as I can remember, and it was the text in that area that set out why this fitted in with broader government policy.
Right.
And that's what I think it was looking at.
Are you sure that you didn't really mean let's mask the truth about how much progress we've made and make out we've made more progress than we have?
No.
You're certain about that?
I'm absolutely certain about that.
Because we see at the top of the page, Brian Martin responds to you at 11:11 a.m. and he says this: "You can roll a turd in glitter if it gets us moving, smiley face." Now, what did you understand him to mean by that?
Do whatever you need to do to get the discussion document out, I think was what he's saying.
But this is a question I never thought I'd utter, but what was the turd in that?
I think, well, look, you'd have to ask Mr. Martin, but I think all he's saying is I don't care what you have to do, just get it going. I think that's what he's saying, really.
Right, because we can see that the context for this emails was you suggesting that significant progress had been made, and Mr. Martin saying, well, that's pushing it a bit. So isn't one interpretation of this that what he meant was what you'd achieved so far was akin to a turd, but you were going to have to dress it up in order to get people interested in it?
No, I don't.
And persuade them that you'd done some more work than you actually had?
No, because what we're talking about is... So the lower email chain refers to progress on ADB. What we're talking about here is the discussion document. It's not part B that we're talking about in these later parts of the exchange at all.
I see.
It's the discussion document and the sub, or whatever we need to do to get this out of the building is what he's talking about there.
So you're having to sprinkle glitter on it, glitter that will be attractive to the seniors, i.e. make it more of a deregulatory package. Is that what you're saying?
There were other policies in government that I think, tried to reference. There, at one stage, it was called a productivity review. That was, again, another form of gilding, if you like, to make it more palatable to certain areas. What was very difficult was that it was difficult to identify broader government agendas that this actually fitted within.
Right, I see. Thank you. Now, we know that Melanie Dawes was the Permanent Secretary of the Department from March 2015. She's told us in her witness statement to the inquiry that the morning of the 14th of June 2017, when the Grenfell fire occurred, was the first time she'd heard of the Lakanal House fire, the coroner's recommendations, or the commitment to simplify ADB by 2016-2017. Now, can you help us as to how that position came about, that the Permanent Secretary of the Department didn't know about any of these things until the Grenfell Tower fire?
I think that you would need to do an audit of who... So when I put submissions up, I took instructions from Bob Leadsom as to who to copy in to those submissions. And you would need to audit, I guess, who sent those submissions where. And then what happens to them after that when they go into private offices or elsewhere, it's beyond my...
Okay.
I just simply can't provide you with any information on that.
So you can't help us?
No.
Okay. Now, we know that the final draft of the discussion document and the submission seeking approval of the proposed scope of work contained within it was sent to Gavin Barwell on the 23rd of March 2017. If we can look at that submission, it's at CLG 30019392. Now, this is the submission. It's prepared by you. It's cleared by Bob Leadsom. We can see that on the top right-hand side. We can see its purpose in paragraph 1. Ministers previously approved development of a discussion document setting out the potential scope of work on building regulations policy over coming years. This submission seeks ministers' agreement on the proposed scope as set out in the final draft discussion document. And then we can see the timing is routine. So this submission was not put up as an urgent submission, was it?
No, because urgent submissions were... The label urgent was used when there was an absolute, very immediate deadline that needed to be made, a day or 2 days or something of that nature.
Right. But can we agree, and we can look through the whole submission, that there's no hint in this which tells him that this document has been years in the making and is now delayed to the point of embarrassment, and that he needs to get on top of this urgently? That wasn't the message that was being given in this submission, and I want to know why.
Well, I don't know how to answer that in some respects. I think part of I think we wouldn't want to get into an argument about a delay. We just wanted to get the document out and published. So starting to get into a discussion about why it's late or those factors, we were just focused on, well, now we've actually got the opportunity to get this to the minister. Can we get it to him and then get this out? That's
Right.
all we cared about at the time. But we had been ready to put this up in September 2016, pretty much, and it had been delayed. There's a submission to Gavin Barwell in September, so maybe early October 2016, we were probably ready to go with this, but I was told that Minister wouldn't be looking at anything other than the highest priority submissions until the Housing and Planning White Paper was published. That was originally scheduled to be published in late October, early November, and so you go, right, okay, that's another 3-4 weeks. We will live with that if that's the decision. But actually it wasn't until the middle of February that it was then published, and it was a constant process in that period of it'll be next week, another week, so you're constantly saying, well, okay, we can wait another week. It'll take us much longer to try and look at how doing this another way. So what I'm trying to say is that at least probably 5 months of the delay is down to decisions made in Mr. Barwell's private office.
Right.
And it would not be appropriate to actually start. It wouldn't not just be appropriate, it would be quite destructive to our relationship with that private office if we start pointing fingers and saying this is delayed because of the decisions of your private office.
Well, you didn't necessarily need to point fingers, but couldn't you point out more clearly the delays and the need for some urgency in getting this draft discussion document out so that you could actually begin the work you really wanted to begin?
I accept entirely that we should have stressed the urgency from our point of view of these processes more.
Yeah. If we look at the bottom of page 3, we can see that there was a paragraph in this submission about Lacanal. We see it in the bullet point under key risks and issues, right at the very bottom. It says the 2013 coroner's report on the fire at Lacanal House criticised the clarity of the guidance on Part B fire safety, and in response to this, the then Secretary of State Eric Pickles committed to review it, and then we see the wording that Mr Martin suggested. We have started work on a redraft as recommended by the coroner, but we will need to work with industry to take this further. Now again, the 2016-2017 commitment to the review of Part B is not included in that paragraph, was it?
No.
And do you accept that it should have been?
Yes.
And just to be clear, by the time of the Grenfell Tower fire in June 2017, the discussion document had still not been published. Yes?
That's correct.
Now, you say in your statement that you never had a response from Gavin Barwell's office to this submission, but if we look at CLG 3034284, here we can see an email dated the 18th of April at the top of the page from Tim Learnig in Gavin Barwell's office to all advisors, saying Gavin was content with the recommendations in this sub, particularly interested in the work in parts B and M, and he thought Tim, Nick, Kyron. Now, what's the significance of this submission? Is that an email that's enough to signal the Minister's agreement to the submission?
So it's from Gavin Barwell's private office to Tim Learnig and copied in, and all advisors. It's not from Tim Learnig.
Sorry, you're right to correct.
So this is Gavin Barwell's private office feeding back on the submission and asking for advice from special advisors and policy advisors. Tim Learnig was a policy advisor, he wasn't a special advisor. And he's asking for their views and thoughts on the discussion document and the proposals.
I see. So are you saying you still needed a submission, an email signalling that, having taken into account those views, the Minister was now finally happy?
Yes, we need an email saying yes, go ahead.
Right.
Back to us, not to others. I should note, I did a couple of weeks after putting the submission up, I did I do recall going up to Gavin Barber's private office, and my recollection is that the private secretary said that Gavin had looked at the submission, but he didn't have feedback yet. So
Right.
I do recall that it was progressing.
Right, yes. Now, if we could just look at the final draft of the discussion document, this is at CLG 30193991. Here it is, the March 2017 discussion paper. Now, you can take it from me that there is nothing in this discussion document about the guidance on external fire spread in this document. Part B, if we look at it, starts on page 24 of this document. It's quite a long document. Part B, fire safety. And if we scroll through, there's a number of headings below that. Perhaps if we look at the next page, there's headings about property protection, headings about specialised housing. If we go below that, headings about smoke alarms. Keep going. Basements, means of escape for disabled people, links with the fire safety order. Keep going. That's it. Do you see that?
Yes.
So there was nothing here that assisted with matters of external fire spread, was there?
So my understanding of the commission that I had in relation to this to deliver was improving the clarity of that guidance, not changing the technical requirements of the guidance. So it was about improving the legibility and usability of the document to make that part work, section 12, if you like, work better. This was, so it was rolled in really with the simplification exercise rather than the technical review change, because we did not at that time think that the technical requirements were in default.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll look at some emails that might be relevant to that in a moment. But that's your explanation as to why we don't see any reference to external fire spread in this document.
I don't remember having a discussion or making a conscious decision about that in any way.
Right.
But that would be my explanation based on my recollection of where we were.
Right. Now, in April 2017, the election was announced to take place on the 8th of June 2017. If we could look at another email, we see at CLG 1309037. On the 12th of May, you email Bob Leadsom suggesting what should be included in some initial slides on the building regulations for new ministers. We can see that from the first sentence of your email. And in the second paragraph, you say, firstly, I think we need to present both planning and building regs in tandem to ensure that ministers pay equal attention to building regs priorities. And then in parentheses, you say, it will always be the poor cousin otherwise. See first slide attached. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, what did you mean here when you said that building regulations policies will always be the poor cousin in comparison with planning?
Planning policy, if you, the easiest example of the difference between the two policies is to look at any political manifesto, including the 27 manifestos. You will always find a great deal written about planning and housing supply. Planning is a very political realm. You will struggle to find any reference or commitment in any manifesto to the building control system or the building regulations other than specific issues where that might be a vehicle for delivery. So it is, I think, it was certainly during my time, a perennially kind of marginal area of policy compared to some other areas, and that affected the way that it was prioritised, in my view.
Right. Now, we can see from the documents that you appear to have spoken to Bob Leadsom about post-election options and followed this with an email to him in May. If we go to CLG 1309051. So here, this is on the 17th of May 2017. So still before the election, you say, Bob, we spoke about post-election options. I've used today to do some thinking on this. And then you say options include. And the second point you make in that first list is force decisions at an earlier stage. If we are clear on manifesto implications, evaluate how these align with the work we know is necessary, and seek ministers' early agreement to use the discussion document to state direction of travel more positively, i.e. commit to a Part B review, Part M review, rather than just mooting them, so we can get on with the necessary work. Do you see that?
Yes.
So is it right, is it fair to say that over the past 4 years, in fact, what had been happening was that a Part B review had only been mooted rather than a decision actually being made to carry it out?
No, I don't accept that. So, again, it's an internal email. The wording's not chosen with exceptional care. But what I was trying to say there, I think, was rather than publishing the discussion document saying we're going to go out, have discussions, then go nap on the policy, I'm saying actually amend the discussion document, say we are starting work now and here's what we're doing, we will do further engagement. So it's just, in a way, it's committing to that scope so that scope can go forward immediately rather than waiting until you've gone through the discussion document process to finalise that decision. So it's effectively to say to ministers, we want you to commit to this scope now, so we get on with it immediately whilst we tell industry what's going on, rather than telling industry what's going on. And the purpose of that discussion was to sense check whether there was anything missing that we needed to include in the scope. I think in my witness statement, I said, we had not had the opportunity to set out a proper platform for engagement with industry for, by this stage, probably 8.5 years, because the kind of formal review process ground to a halt after the 2008 crash.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is, tell ministers, right, we have to actually you just need to decide now that this is what you're going to do, and we'll backfill with anything that's needed rather than doing that discussion and kind of consultation process first.
Right, I see. And why not do that back in 2015? Why wasn't that the tactic then?
Because we wanted to do the sense check. For precisely that reason. This is we're in a position where, as I said before, we're very dependent on industry disclosure to understand what's going on. We don't have the ability to interrogate the market directly. We don't have market surveillance powers. We need to ask questions. We need people to submit information to us to do that.
Yes.
And that engagement is really important in us getting things right.
Yes, I understand that. And we'll come to quite a lot of examples of that later in your evidence. We can see in this email, you say this is based on 3 broad conclusions. And then you say in point 1, you say the simplification plan will be successful in dealing with editorial consistency and format, which is good, but has highlighted a lot of problems with the quality of the technical requirements in the approved documents. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Now, I thought you were just telling us a moment ago in the context of the discussion document that you hadn't identified that the technical requirements actually needed to change. But here you seem to be saying that the simplification plan and whatever work you've done on that has highlighted a lot of problems with the quality of the technical requirements in the approved documents. So which was it?
So there is a difference between modifying a performance standard or a requirement and the quality of how that's expressed, I think. I don't recall precisely what I meant by this, but I believe what it's referring to is how well drafted and clear the technical requirements are, rather than whether the performance standards or requirements are actually wrong.
Right. And did that include, can you help us with this, the clarity of the guidance on the use of combustible cladding materials in tall buildings?
I simply don't know.
You can't help
I
it,
don't
no.
believe that I was thinking of that level of fidelity.
Right. Then in the second broad conclusion, you say this, you say we will not have sufficient capacity to meet priorities as well as get all of the AD up to a good standard in the next Parliament, utilising internal resource alone. This includes assessing, and then you've got secondary life safety risks that have been flagged by industry bodies such as frameless glazing, / office to resi balustrades in ADK, concern about carbon monoxide in ADJ, suggestions of dangerous roofing practices, etc., which are starting to form something of a backlog. Now, just help us with this. Why do you describe these as secondary life safety risks?
I don't know. I think probably because the evidence wasn't there for us to fully understand what those risks were.
Right. Were there any primary life safety risks that you weren't listing here but which you were aware of? This is May 17, so we're just 1 month before the Grenfell fire.
Well, catastrophic risks would be primary risks, yes.
Yes.
So structural failure and major fires would be up there in that category.
What about the risks posed by the use of ACMPE, polyethylene, in tall buildings? Was that recognised as either a primary or a secondary life safety risk by this time?
At that time, I don't recall being aware of suggestions that ACMP was being used anywhere. So I believe that the system was functioning at that point and delivering compliant outcomes. So I would not have been thinking that it is a risk, but every part of the regulations, or the vast majority of them, and the statutory guidance are addressing risks. It's about whether we know that they're materialising or not.
Right. Now, you attached to this email a draft programme of work for after the election. If we can go to that now, CLG 1309052. So here we go. We can see from the title, Building Regulations Programme of Work Post-Election. And I want to look at the bottom of page 2. There's a heading, Technical Review of Building Regulation Requirements. And it says this: there are a number of pressing technical updates / reviews where the need to undertake work is likely to have either political priority or is urgently needed to address identified deficiencies. In a rough priority order, we can anticipate this to include some or all of the following. And then you've got a list. And the first point is resolve technical issues in Part E, noise. Second point, update Part L to reflect updated SAP. What's a SAP?
A standard assessment procedure.
Yeah. Third point, update Part LF to reflect government energy policy and research findings. And then point 4, review of Part B, fire. Now, why was the review of Part B fourth in this list, which was in priority order?
Yeah, it's an internal document. It's a rough priority order. All 4 of those, and I think there's a subsequent much longer list of other parts that sits below that. So this is not the list in its entirety, I don't believe, is it?
No, but the point I'm making is why wasn't the review of Part B, fire, at the top of that list? Because some of those other issues simply couldn't have affected life safety, could they? Part E, noise.
In terms of these parts that we've got listed here, in my mind, they all needed to be started pretty much immediately. And I apologise for not putting Part B first.
Do you accept that you should have done now, given what we've seen in the other emails about deficiencies in technical requirements, the need for Part B becoming pressing, etc.?
This was for internal discussion. It wasn't intended to signify a kind of actual priority order, I think.
I see. So this wasn't the actual priority order. This was what? some alternative priority order that you had internally that didn't reflect your actual priorities? I don't understand that answer.
It's a document prepared for kind of discussion. We don't even, I think at this stage it's right, this is during the election period, isn't it?
So you send the email attaching it. So on 12th of May 2017.
So I can't recall when the election was.
Sorry, 17th of May 2017.
I can't recall when the election.
It was on the 8th of June.
Yeah. So this is an early stage election planning document with an incoming government with an unknown manifesto. So it's kind of early thinking. It's not a formulated policy position because we can't actually achieve that until we have a government.
Right.
So I'm probably just rushing things down on paper, frankly, and I don't think it should be taken as a statement. It certainly can't be taken as a statement of the government's intent because there was no government in place at the time.
I understand. Okay, I'm going to move on now to ask you some questions about the department's role in the interpretation of the guidance in approved document B and about your knowledge of matters relating to the use of combustible materials in the external wall arrangements of high-rise buildings. And I want to start by looking at Brian Martin's witness statement at CLG 3019469. And I want to look at page 38 and look at paragraph 113. Now, just over halfway down in that paragraph, in the middle of the line, there's a sentence beginning, "Here it is." Do you have that?
Yes.
And he says, here, it is important to recall that compliance with the functional requirements of the regulations is to be achieved by the person undertaking the construction, the design team, architect, builder, etc., and it is signed off by the relevant building control body. The department's role, as set out above, is a devolved one. It sets the regulations and administers the approved documents. How the industry secures compliance with the functional requirements is a matter for the industry, as my comments in this email exchange were intended to explain. Now, does that accord with your own understanding of the department's role in relation to the building regulations and approved documents?
The department's not devolved. It's the role of actually undertaking building control is fully devolved. But yes, the department's role is in establishing and providing oversight of the system, setting the regulations and drafting and publishing the approved documents in support of those regulations. It has no role, it's not, in fact, it has less than no role in some respects in the actual direct regulation of the market. All of those responsibilities are fully devolved to building control bodies, but responsibility for compliance rests with the persons undertaking the work.
Right.
If you go back to the Hansard for the 1984 Building Act, it is worth noting, I believe, that it is very clear that the design of the whole system is intended to deliver a system with the minimum possible of government intervention in actually delivering compliance in the marketplace.
Right,
and that is the way it's structured.
So that it's in that respect that you agree with the description of the department's role as being a devolved one, yes?
Well, no, I'm not sure that's quite right. The powers and responsibilities are devolved to building control bodies and the persons undertaking building work.
Yes, thank you. Now, do you agree that part of the division's role was to administer the approved documents, as Mr. Martin describes it?
We were there to, I'm not sure administer maybe, but our job was to update the approved documents in line with government policy.
Yes. Well, let me take you through a few possible types of work that it involved. Did it involve giving some consideration to the likely readership of that document and making sure it was drafted in order to be suitable to that likely readership?
Well, you would want to do that, yes, of course you would. I don't think those duties are set out anywhere in law. But of course, we were trying to do that, across all of the approved documents at that time by the simplification programme we put in place, which was, in my view, very long overdue. There had been, if I might offer some further information, a continued and persistent lack of will to invest in the quality of the approved documents over a very extended period. I think I said yesterday, we were getting to the point where the structure of the documents had become disjointed. There were at least 4 different front ends with slightly different wording describing how compliance could be achieved and how the building control system worked. Some of the approved documents hadn't had technical reviews by this stage for getting on for 19 or 20 years.
Yes, I'm going to stop you there. I understand all of that. I'm just seeking to understand from you what you in the department understood your role was in relation to those approved documents, in practice, in terms of what you were trying to achieve with them. Yes? So I've asked you about giving some consideration to the likely readership, and I think your answer means yes, you did have to give some consideration to who was likely to be reading it and understanding that guidance, yes?
Yes.
Writing those documents in a clear and understandable manner, was that a priority of the department?
As far as was possible, yes. And I would note that, again, I had pushed over the previous 2 years to bring that process of moving approved documents into the new style guide and undertaking plain English edits hard at a time where there was no demand to do that from higher up in the department, but purely as a matter of good practice.
Okay. What about achieving a settled understanding within the department about the actual scope, meaning and application of the provisions of the guidance being written? Did you understand that to be an important objective when you were looking at these approved documents?
Could you ask the start of that question again, please?
Yes, achieving a settled understanding within the department as to the actual scope, meaning and application of the provisions. Was that an objective? To make sure you were all on the same page as to what you thought that document meant and what the intention of it was?
So there was no formal set of structural objectives in that respect. But since 2015, I think I had been promoting a more formalised end-to-end review process of the approved documents, which was intended to enable us to actually do precisely what you're saying, which is to audit intent against the guidance.
Yes.
In a much more mannered way. But we were some years off getting there at this point. It was going to take a while to build the resource and actually go through a process of taking the existing... this is something that should have been done. Again, as a matter of course, we should have had a mapping of the documents against intent with research recorded in the background. We should have had these audit trails. But this takes resource, and that resource was never provided, and the structure was never put in place, frankly.
Right.
So, yes, that is absolutely a desirable objective. It is an enormous task requiring a great deal of resource to map consistently against every piece of statutory guidance and requirement within the regulations.
What about a preparedness to clarify or explain the scope, meaning and application of the guidance, if and when alerted to a lack of clarity in relation to any specific section?
I think let me think about this for a moment. So in terms of giving advice externally, my experience was that the protocol was that we would always simply refer to the guidance in the approved document. That should be the basis of where you start with any in-principle discussion, and it would be an in-principle discussion because we were not permitted to talk about specific cases in case they compromised an appeal or determination process. So if the department gives a formal view on an actual project, it can query legal appeals and determinations processes. So it's an interesting question, actually, whether we had a formal obligation to... Sorry, can you read the question again, actually?
Whether there was a preparedness to clarify or explain the scope, meaning and application of the provisions of the guidance if a question was raised about it. Was there that preparedness within the department? And if not, why not?
The technical team took responses, took queries, letters, emails, telephone calls, and they would do their best to explain or provide clarity where people approached the department with those questions. So there was both a willingness and the preparedness to do that.
Thank you.
But the resource to do it again was limited.
Okay. Now, you have explained already that there were some processes or mechanisms in place by which the department was able, without the need for a formal review process, to clarify the guidance. And you explained yesterday that that could be, for example, in an FAQ, a frequently asked question response, yes?
Under certain conditions, yes.
Or perhaps a circular letter. You've explained that was one option, although I think you said you couldn't remember an instance of where that had been used.
Yeah, and more importantly, I had tried on 2 occasions when I was a policy lead to use a circular letter as a way of disseminating clarification or to address what I'd seen in terms of some issues of what I felt were persistent non-compliance with the intent of an approved document.
Yes.
And I had been told that all that we could do in a circular letter would be simply to quote the existing guidance
Yes.
within the approved document.
Yes.
So there were my experience, and one of the reasons why, I would love, it would have been fantastic if we had, and I think we should have had, a mechanism like the HSE building bulletins or updates where we could highlight problems or issues and provide a commentary on them to industry. That would have been fantastic, but we didn't have that. We didn't have that outlet.
Okay. Now, just sticking with FAQs for a moment, in terms of FAQs, who within the department's team would be responsible for deciding on matters to be included or explained by that means?
It would be for policy leads to determine if they felt an FAQ was needed.
So in the case of fire safety, it would be for Brian Martin, yes, as the policy lead on fire safety, to decide if he thought an FAQ was warranted and, if necessary, to draft that FAQ and have it published?
That would be the normal process, or they may get someone to help with the drafting, but they're not usually particularly complex pieces of text.
And he had the authority to do that, did he?
He would need to clear it. There's a process, so he would need to have any draft FAQ assessed by the legal department to ensure that it was a clarification and not a change to the guidance.
Yeah.
He would then need to get sign-off from, I think, Bob Leadsom. Certainly there would be a senior civil service sign-off process. They would then go to Special Advisor's Office for approval before publication.
Right. And just to be clear, that wouldn't go through ministers, no?
Effectively, ministers are delegated their authority to SPADs to clear those documents, as far as I understand it.
Yeah. Now, let's have a look at the example of some of these. If we go to CLG 1603, this is a document called Approved Document B, Frequently Asked Questions. And this one happens to be from March 2016. We can see the date on the bottom right. Do you see that?
Yes, sorry. Could I just add one thing further? My experience in doing frequently asked questions was that we also needed evidence that these were issues that were being raised with the department, not just something that we had.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, if we look at the contents list for this on page 3, we just get a feel for the scope of the types of topics on which the department was publishing FAQs. So you can see we've got fire doors, we've got dealing with fire precautions in self-catering holiday homes, fire suppression systems, etc. Do you see that?
I do.
And then you've got FAQs on B1, B3, B5 matters below that. Do you see that?
I do.
And was there a formal process or criteria by which these topics were included, or was it simply left to the policy lead? As you said, it would only be if somebody had actually started querying or clarifying this. But was there a more formal policy or procedure in place in relation to these FAQs?
No, it was driven by the policy lead primarily. In fact, I can't think who else would actually decide that process needed to be started or followed.
And if we can just look at some examples from within this document, if we go to page 7, and we look at the final 3 paragraphs, we can see there's a heading there in bold. Should a fire alarm be provided throughout a block of flats? This is under requirement B1, means of warning and escape. And it says underneath that, it's the penultimate paragraph on the page, the guidance in B1, section 1 of the approved document, fire alarm and fire detection systems, is not intended to be applied to the common parts of blocks of flats and does not include a provision to interconnect installations in separate flats. Do you see that?
I do.
So that's a good example of a form of clarification that's been provided in this FAQ, yes?
Yeah.
And let's look at another one on page 8. In the middle of the page, we've got a heading, why do we say 1 bed and not 1 person for care homes? And then beneath that, it says, paragraph 3.49 in volume 2 of ADB states, bedrooms should not contain more than 1 bed. This includes a double bed. This is for design without sprinklers, relying on fire-resisting construction to protect occupants that are remote from the seat of fire. And if you look at the very last paragraph under that heading, it then says it is not the intention of the approved document to separate couples who happen to live in a care home by insisting that they sleep in separate beds. Do you see that?
I do.
So there's a really wide range of issues on which FAQs are issued pursuant to this guidance, yes?
Yes.
And having looked at that, can we agree that it's clear from this document that this was a means by which the intent of particular existing provisions in the approved document could be made clear?
Within the limits of that I've described, yes.
Yes. Now, just moving on then to think about your role and Mr. Martin's role in more detail, do you agree that it was part of your technical team's role in the years between the formal reviews of approved document B to become or stay informed about changes to construction or design practices which would need to be taken into account when considering potential future changes to the document?
Yes, the technical team had an informal engagement mandate in those periods.
Yes. Now, you've described a number of processes in your statement for gathering information, and we've actually looked at some of those already yesterday. But just one of those processes you mention is in relation to the investigation of real fires contract. If we just look at paragraph, perhaps go back to your statement, page 40, paragraph 158 of your statement. You say, during this period, the department also continued to fund and operate a research contract with the building research establishment referred to as the investigation of real fires contract. This contract reported periodically on the findings from investigation into real fires, with a specific view to identifying any emerging problems which might indicate the need to change guidance in the approved documents relating to fire safety. This specifically included consideration of building design, construction practice and use of materials. Do you see that?
I do.
What was your own involvement with the investigation of real fires contract with the BRE?
I don't recall having any direct involvement with that contract. So I would always work to support policy leads and other officials in the division who are developing business cases or bidding plans for research. But preparing the contract in terms of its scope would sit with the policy lead. And
so that was Mr. Martin?
Yeah, and the procurement process would be dealt with by whichever official in the division headed up on the actual letting and procurement of those contracts.
Right. Were you ever made aware that from October 2012 onwards, the BRE was specifically precluded from making any policy recommendations, including recommendations for change, in their investigation of real fires reports?
No, I wasn't. I'm aware of it now.
When did you first become aware of that?
In the course of this inquiry.
Right. When I was questioning Mr. Crowder about that? Before that?
I can't remember where specifically, no.
Were you surprised to learn that the contractual requirements changed in October 2012 such that the BRE was specifically precluded from making policy recommendations, including recommendations for change?
I wouldn't have seen that as necessarily abnormal, in that over time the department took a more precautionary approach to allowing those contractors that it employed to formulate policy options before research had been evaluated by and seen by ministers. So I think this isn't about trying to inhibit change or restricting their reporting. What it's saying is your focus should be on identifying the problems that we need to address, and then we will, as the department, take forward the policy development to respond to the actual problems that you have identified. So it's a focus on identifying issues that we would then formulate policy to address.
I see. So you didn't think it was odd that an organisation like the BRE, with all its expertise, was precluded from making recommendations for change in its reports on those projects?
That would be well, the investigations of Real Fire's contract was not a particularly large contract. Where issues were identified, you can follow up and do further work, and you can invite those recommendations once you've got the appropriate kind of sign-offs and permissions to have those discussions. So I certainly don't think there's anything sinister about that. It's a matter of focusing the work of the contract on developing the evidence base rather than on developing policy proposals, which really belong within the government.
Right. And do you remember any concrete examples of what knowledge the division actually gained from that contract about building design, construction practice and use of materials in the time that you were head of technical policy?
I can't recall specifics. I do recall the reports being delivered and effectively consumed or used by the division. But no, I don't recall I don't have a specific example to give you to that.
Now, if we look at paragraph 156 at page 40 of your witness statement now, you say, in combination, these processes, research, industry engagement and code design and public consultation, help to ensure that changes to the building regulations adequately reflected industry practice and that guidance was formulated to deliver the intended regulatory outcomes. Yes?
Yes.
Now, can we agree that in terms of the cladding of high-rise buildings or any matters relating to external fire spread, no changes were made between 2014 and 2017 while you were head of technical policy, still less any changes which reflected industry practice at the time?
There were no changes to ADB made in that period.
Yeah. Now,
but can the only way to make those changes was through the Part B review process. That's the only way that can happen. And I think it's clear that we were trying to progress that, although we did not make the progress we wanted to.
just looking at paragraph 145 of your statement on page 38, you tell us here that information such as reports or briefings and correspondence received would have been referred to the fire safety policy lead, in this case Brian Martin, for consideration or response. And you say, I've had sight of a number of pieces of correspondence with the APPG, but do not recall seeing these at the time, though I was aware that there was ongoing engagement between the APPG and ministers. Now, just to be clear, the fire safety policy lead that you're talking about and the fire specialist you describe elsewhere in your statement, that's one and the same person, Mr. Martin, yes?
It is, yeah.
Now, putting aside the correspondence between the department and the APPG, in the period during which you were in post as the technical policy lead, would the role of gathering that kind of information fall to anybody other than Brian Martin?
It may have been delegated to someone that Brian Martin line managed. They might have been tasked to engage or identify, do research, so on and so forth. but in that policy area, the policy lead, Mr. Martin, would be responsible.
Right. Did you yourself gather and report back to the team on any information relating to fire safety?
I don't recall doing so. It may well be that there were things from time to time that I brought to the team's attention, but I can't recall specifics.
Right. Did you regard that as part of your role, or was that Mr. Martin's role and anyone he delegated to do that role?
I mean, Mr. Martin's, as the Part B policy lead, he would lead on all kind of industry and sector engagement, as the other policy leads in their relevant sectors did.
Yeah. Now, looking at paragraph 146, below that, you say this. You say, issues raised would be logged or recorded by policy leads for further consideration, and feedback would be provided on the outcomes from meetings and external engagement, including identifying any specific areas of concern. So that was your understanding, was it, of how the system worked for gathering this information, feeding it back, recording it, logging it, yes?
It is very unsystemic, though. It is not coordinated. It was probably different policy leads kept records of these issues in different ways. There had never been a systemic way of actually processing or recording this information within the division. So it was kind of quite siloed, and it was heavily dependent on the policy lead.
Right. Well, it's not a qualified statement there in your witness statement. You say issues raised would be logged or recorded by policy leads. Are you saying that some policy leads would log and record them, but others wouldn't?
There was no... Sorry, I apologise if that suggests a formalised process. That was not the intention. There was no kind of formalised process for managing that information.
So what caused you to say that in your witness statement?
Because my experience was that the policy leads did keep records in some form or other of the issues that they were looking at, but it's not formalised. So I apologise if that's inaccurate.
Right. So just to be clear, there wasn't like a central receptacle for these records to be held. There wasn't a formal place on the system where they were to be logged and recorded.
No, and again, I would say absolutely there should have been, but that again takes more resource and it takes more capacity.
So how would you and other members of the technical team become aware of any such issues if they weren't formally logged and recorded?
It was for the policy lead to raise issues that they felt need to be escalated.
Does that mean, in reality, that it was for the policy lead, i.e. Brian Martin, simply to mention them verbally to you as and when it occurred to him?
It might start with a conversation, but it would more normally, I think it would probably be a piece of correspondence where something wanted to be formally raised. I
see. So an email, just an ad hoc email?
Yes. The industry... my observation would be we were undertaking industry engagement on the same basis that the department had been undertaking industry engagement for 20 or 30 years. It was an archaic model in many respects, but it was the lightest touch possible model in terms of resource to remain engaged with the sector or sectors when a formal approved document process wasn't in motion, if you like.
Are you really saying that it wouldn't have been possible for resource reasons to have had some kind of written log whereby the policy leads could write up notes based on important interactions they might have had with industry, where it was flagging potential issues or changes that you might need to make to approved document B or the regulations?
I'm not saying it was impossible. I'm saying that even in times where the division had significantly greater resource, that sort of process wasn't put into place. And for the majority of the period that I was head of technical policy, we were at a pretty much all-time low in terms of capacity with policy leads spread over more and more parts of the regulations, and with less and less policy support to enable them to do the jobs that they already had. So yes, I would very much have liked to have a whole series of processes in place, but there was no resource to put kind of those. There was, to put those logs into place and then keep them up to date and actually make them useful does take resource.
Right. If we look at Mr. Martin's witness statement on this point, so CLG 3019469 at page 55, and if we look at paragraph 157, he tells us this. There was no specific mechanism to monitor changes in building design, construction practice and use of materials. As I've stated above, it was not the function of the Building Regulations Division to review or approve innovative construction products or methods of construction. The approved documents provide guidance on common building practices, and building designers and building control bodies are expected to use the approved documents as a benchmark. Where innovative products and methods of construction are adopted, there's an expectation that they will use skill and judgment in order to ensure that the functional requirements of the regulations are met. So I think you would now agree with the first sentence of that paragraph where he says there was no specific mechanism to monitor changes in building design, construction practice and use of materials, yes?
I think that's what what I've said is consistent with that, I think.
Now, in terms of what he says in the next sentence, he says, as I've stated above, it was not the function of the Building Regulations Division to review or approve innovative construction products. Now, I think we can agree that it wasn't your role to approve innovative construction products or methods of construction, but surely it was your role to keep such methods under review, yes?
I would say not formally. My understanding of the technical function was that it was a relatively benign function. It is not a market surveillance function in any shape or form. It was intended to enable the department to engage with industry, to obtain information and to remain in touch with technical communities, certainly in its kind of earliest iterations. But it was not intended and never intended, I would suggest, to undertake any form of market surveillance.
Well, he's not using the word market surveillance there. He's saying it was not the function of the Building Regulations Division to review innovative construction products or methods of construction. How on earth could you ensure that the approved documents were fit for purpose if it wasn't any part of your role, and put market surveillance to one side, to be reviewing innovative construction products and methods of construction?
The basis of the functional system, and I think, the basis of the functional system is that the high-level objectives enable the marketplace to operate without, in accordance with those requirements, without that kind of review or monitoring going on. So the whole system is predicated on people undertaking building work, making positive efforts to comply with the legal requirements, the functional requirements. So if this is dysfunctional, then it is a sign of broad systemic dysfunction, because the capacity needed to actively review the number of products and systems and the level of innovation in the market would be enormous. This is a £130 billion a year industry. The range of products and technologies is enormous. It's absolutely it was inconceivable that we would be kind of formally able to get under the skin of what these innovative technologies or new products were doing. It's completely outside our remit, but also it's unachievable. Now, we would try to stay in touch with changes, But again, it's a very light touch form of engagement.
Sure, but at least in broad terms, your technical policy leads needed to have a feel for particular new construction products that were becoming commonly used. Of course, if they were in rare use, you might not expect that, but commonly used innovative construction products or new methods of construction which were becoming popular, which the building control officers using this guidance would be coming across. Surely, in broad terms, it was the role of the department to ensure that it was on top of that.
I don't know how to answer that, because there is such a disconnect between the functionality that we had and being able to do that role properly. So I can't almost make the jump between where we were in terms of the capacity and the structure that we had, and a role that did that effectively.
Right. I mean, are you saying that you didn't think that the department had the ability or capacity to be issuing practical guidance relevant to the functional requirements of the building regulations?
No.
Because it simply couldn't keep up with the way the industry was moving?
Actually, I think, in hindsight, I think that innovation had out-accelerated the system as a whole. I think the system had become outmoded. The problem was, if I might offer an opinion, that the lack of insight, market surveillance, key performance indicators, however you may wish to put it, the lack of evidence base as to whether the system performing was almost kind of hardwired into the system, in that we didn't have direct market insight to know what was going on. We were always, as I said, reliant on disclosure in some form. So I think that the point that the system was becoming obsolete is probably absolutely right.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, is that a good moment for the morning break?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harral will have a break at that point.
Thank you.
We'll come back, please, at 20 to 12. And again, please don't discuss your evidence with anyone while you're out of the room. Thank you, Ms. Grange. 20 to 12, please.
Thank you.
Would you ask Mr. Harral to come back in, please? All right, Mr. Harral, are you ready to carry on?
Yes, thank you, sir.
If you need a break, you will tell me, won't you?
Yes, absolutely, sir.
Of course. Right, thank you. Yes, Ms. Gringe.
Yes, thank you. Now, just carrying on with the same theme in terms of what information your department had, you mentioned in your witness statement a particular matter raised with you in relation to Kingspan K15 cool firm insulation in July 2014, which we will come on to. But just putting that aside for a moment, that correspondence, and also setting aside the matters raised by the APPG, if we go back to your witness statement at page 38, paragraph 146, you talk about issues were logged or recorded, and we've gone through that, and feedback would be provided, and from meetings and external engagement, including identifying any specific areas of concern. Now, do you recall any other issues that Mr. Martin raised with you between 2014 and 2017, which you would categorise as specific areas of concern based on his interaction with industry?
There would have been a number of areas, I'm sure. I can't formulate a list, but clearly we already had research that was ongoing that was driven by industry engagement into a number of areas of concern. I think I can't remember the items that were on the schedule that was prepared as a kind of record of the key issues that we thought were apparent. But I'm sorry, I can't think of specifics.
No, understood. Well, let me be more specific. Were you aware at any time before the Grenfell Tower fire of any problem with the guidance in paragraphs 12.6 or 12.7 of the approved document?
I don't recall that being raised with me.
Right. Were you aware at any time before the Grenfell Tower fire of any debate or difference of interpretation in relation to the scope or meaning of the guidance in relation to external walls?
Not in a. I don't recall that being raised in a formal way.
Right. What about in an informal way?
Well, no, I don't recall it being raised in a way that I would recognise as. No, I'm sorry, I don't recall.
Did you detect, before the Grenfell Tower fire, any uncertainty on the part of Mr. Martin in relation to the scope or meaning of the guidance contained in section 12 of the approved document?
I don't know. I don't.
Did you detect any uncertainty on his part about the meaning of the word filler material in paragraph 12.7 of the approved document?
No, I don't believe so.
Can we take it that you are well aware now that there had been, for some years before the fire at Grenfell Tower, an active debate on those topics?
I am aware, yes.
When did you first become aware that that specific debate had been going on during the period in which you were in post?
It would be after the fire.
After the fire at Grenfell Tower?
I believe so, yeah.
Right. And from whom did you come to learn about that?
I honestly can't recall. I think there was a great deal of debate, clearly in the media as well as debate within the department on these issues, so I can't specifically recall.
Did Mr. Martin tell you after the fire that there had been a debate going on for some time about a potential lack of clarity around section 12 of the approved document dealing with external walls?
I really do not recall. No, I'm sorry, I don't recall.
You don't recall?
No.
So you don't recall asking Mr. Martin or any other member of your team to give you details of what had been going on in terms of discussions over Section 12 of the approved document after the fire?
I don't recall doing that if I did, no.
Let's look at Mr. Martin's witness statement again. It's at CLG 3019469, and I want to look at page 54. At paragraph 155, he says this. He says, there were certainly concerns raised about the testing of cladding products, including ACM panels and insulation materials, during the period 2009 to the 14th of June 2017, and I was aware, as were senior officials within the department, of the issues regarding the testing of such products. And then he goes on, however, within the context of the system of building regulations in England, it was my view that relevant industry bodies were taking appropriate steps to produce guidance and ensure that the functional requirements of the regulations, particular requirement B4, were being met. Where I was able to, I tried to assist the industry during the period in question, drawing on my knowledge from both my time in the department and at BRE previously. Now, again, aside from the Kingspan K15 matter, were you, as a senior official within the department and Mr. Martin's line manager, aware of concerns raised about the testing of cladding products, including ACM panels and insulation materials, in that period?
The only issue that I recall being aware of was the K15 issue that came to our attention.
Right, because he's specific about saying these were concerns raised about the testing of cladding products. Do you remember any such issues being discussed with him?
No, I'm afraid I don't recall.
In the period between June 2011 and June 2017, were you aware of ACM panels and or ACM products with a polyethylene core as a product for use in the external cladding systems of buildings? Did you have an awareness of that product?
I think I would have been aware of it from the previous fires overseas, yes.
And what did you know about those products, ACM with a PE core? What did you know about them?
Not a great deal, I'm afraid. I understood that they were a rain screen cladding panel, aluminium with a plastic or polyethylene combustible core.
Right. Did you ever speak to anybody about those panels and how they were comprised, what their fire properties were? Do you remember having any discussions about that?
I don't believe I did, no.
Were you made aware at any time during your time as technical policy lead that the department had undertaken a full-scale test at the BRE on a system incorporating ACM PE panels in July 2001, long before your time, as part of a project to review the guidance in BR 135?
No, I was not.
When were you first made aware that there had been testing of an ACM PE panel in 2001 at the BRE?
Again, it would be when that information came to light, I think, through this inquiry.
Right. So nobody drew your attention to that in the department prior to the inquiry revealing that information?
No. And again, the logging and recording of outputs from research contracts was non-systematic.
Yes. Were you made aware, or did you at any time hear any discussions relating to any concerns about the use of ACM panels with a PE or otherwise combustible core in the external wall arrangements of buildings over 18 metres in height in this country?
As far as I can recall, no. Sorry, I don't believe so.
What was your understanding in the period before the Grenfell fire about whether or not ACM products with a PE core could be used in the external wall arrangements of buildings over 18 metres?
My understanding was that there were types of ACM that could have the right classification to be used, but the limits on use of combustible materials should preclude their use.
Right, just take that in stages. When you said, my understanding was that there were types of ACM that could have the right classification to be used. What do you mean by that?
I believe that there are various different types of core materials for ACM panels. I think actually I probably became only aware of that after the fire. To be fair, if I'm being, I think that's probably likely.
Right. Did you have an understanding about whether such products with a PE core could be used at height in compliance with the building regulations and the guidance in ADB?
No, I thought that the guidance in ADB precluded their use.
Right. Is that because of the work you say you did after the Dubai cladding fire was brought to your attention?
Certainly part of that discussion, yeah.
Right. We'll come on to that. Did you have any understanding during the time when you were head of technical about the dangers presented by ACM PE products when used in external cladding systems of high-rise buildings?
Only in terms of the very visible effects on fires that were happening, to my knowledge, I think in Australia and Dubai primarily.
Did you know that ACM PE products were readily available on the market in the UK for use as cladding panels?
I don't recall, because they're only only limited in certain locations. It would be. Yes, it wouldn't. There's not an absolute ban on their use, but it would not have occurred to me. I wouldn't have thought about that, I don't think, at any stage.
Right. And are you saying that you had absolutely no awareness that that type of cladding panel, ACM PE, was being used on tall buildings, many tall buildings, before the Grenfell Tower fire?
I absolutely did not know that was the case.
Right. Now, I want to look now at a series of emails between Mr. Martin and Tony Baker of the BRE in November 2013. If we can go to CLG 1305895. Now, we may not go through the whole of this chain, but I want to see some of it, set some of it in context for you. If we start at the bottom of the chain on page 2 first, we can see there's an email from Tony Baker to Brian Martin. Did you know who Tony Baker was when you were head of technical policy?
No.
No. What about Sarah Colwell? Had you heard of Sarah Colwell?
I imagine that I'd seen her name on reports, but I had not met her, I don't believe, and I do not know her.
Right. So we can see that Mr. Baker, on the 25th of November 2013, says to Mr. Martin, copying in Sarah Colwell and Stephen Howard at the BRE, "Hi, Brian, I hope you're keeping well. I hope you can help with the following. We are seeing an increasing number of inquiries in which we're being asked for our opinion/interpretation of Diagram 40 and ADB B4 clauses 12.6 and 7 in relation to the build-up of systems using board finishes. And we would like to reach a general understanding, so we can respond to all parties in the same way." Do you see that? And then he lists a number of bullet points. The first one is systems with board-type outer layers. The boards are typically 15 to 20 millimetres thick and achieve a Class B S3D2. Clause 12.6 guidance references Diagram 40 in relation to the classification of the finish, which would make acceptable over 18 metres as being BS3D2. But 12.7 talks about insulation or filler materials which make up the wall being limited combustibility. As the maximum surface finish is not defined, a debate has opened up within the industry as to whether or not the boards can be called the finish or the filler. And then he goes over, based on our experience from the original PII programme, I think that's Partners in Industry programme, we would suggest that a definition of the surface finish thickness and filler would assist in clarifying this point and would therefore be grateful for your thoughts. Now, have you seen that correspondence previously?
I have, but only as part of the evidence to this inquiry.
Right. So you didn't ever see it at the time you were head of technical policy?
I think this is a 2013 email. So
Yes.
I wasn't head of technical policy.
No,
at this time.
I appreciate that.
Oh, sorry, but no, okay, yes, no, I didn't when I was head of technical policy. I don't
Yeah.
think so.
And were you ever made aware, when you were head of technical policy, or indeed before, that the BRE were saying they'd been receiving inquiries about the definition of the word filler in paragraph 12.7?
I don't believe so, no.
Did Mr. Martin ever mention that the BRE themselves had raised a question mark over the interpretation of paragraph 12.7 in relation to these materials?
I don't recall him doing so, no.
And were you aware that the term filler material in paragraph 12.7 was not defined? Did you ever have to think about that?
It didn't. I don't recall thinking about it being defined or not, to be honest.
Now, if we go back to the email and go to the top of page 2, I want to look at Mr. Martin's response, which is sent just over half an hour later at 15:47 on the 25th of November. He writes, "Hi, Tony. I see where you are coming from. The problem we have with Class B is that you can have a thin surface that gives you the performance and back it with something less desirable. So there's no such thing as a Class B material. The word filler was introduced because of a particular incident where a polymeric foam was used to keep an aluminium panel stiff. The foam was not used for thermal reasons, so it wasn't insulation." And then in parentheses he says it's still burned, of course, 3 exclamation marks. "Sarah will remember the details, I'm sure. I'm thinking out loud here, but I think a homogeneous Class B board will be fine, effectively a Class B material, question mark. But a lamination of board with something else should revert to the limited combustibility criteria. Does this make sense? Don't quote me on this yet. What do you think?" Now, putting aside the technical detail of the question that Brian Martin's considering, were you aware at any time after this point that the meaning and scope of the term filler material were matters which Mr. Martin still appeared to be undecided about?
I don't believe I was aware of that.
Now, we're aware from the evidence of other witnesses that following this exchange, a meeting was arranged between Brian Martin, Dr. Colwell and Tony Baker of the BRE, which took place on the 30th of January 2014 at Elland House. Now, you took over as head of technical policy in January 2014, so you'd have just been getting familiar with that role.
Yeah.
Do you remember being aware of a meeting between Mr. Martin and the BRE at around that time?
I may have been aware that he was having a meeting with the BRE, but I don't recall
Yeah,
that. No.
and you don't recall him feeding back to you on what was discussed at that meeting?
No.
Would you expect to be fed back to by a policy lead like Mr. Martin if an organisation like the BRE had raised concerns with him about the clarity of the guidance in one of the approved documents?
So, if he thought it was of concern, yes, but a great deal of the industry engagement that went on at a technical level would involve debate about these types of issue. So it wouldn't be a matter of course if someone raised a question, because questions about what the approved documents meant were numerous. I don't know if you audited the department's files, how many emails or letters you would find asking for clarification or providing clarification, but it'd be a great many.
Yes, but this, sorry to interrupt, but this isn't an email or a random letter or email, is it? This is the BRE having a meeting with Mr. Martin, it would appear, about a lack of clarity and some pretty important clauses in approved document B. Now, would you have expected Mr. Martin to have mentioned that to you at some point?
If he believed it was a matter of concern and that further action was needed, then yes.
Right. So only if he thought it was a concern.
That's the way the team worked and had always worked. Certainly, that's the way it worked when I was a grade 7.
So does that mean quite a lot of responsibility rested on the shoulders of Mr. Martin to be feeding back to you areas which were potentially of concern?
That's the way that the division worked pretty much for the entire time that I was there, including as a grade 7.
Yeah. Were you aware that the BRE had an important role advising the department on fire safety? Were you generally aware of that?
I knew that we worked quite often and closely with BRE. Clearly, we had the investigation of real fires contract with BRE, which is a formal reporting line for any such concerns, of course. But yes, of course, I was aware that we worked with BRE quite extensively.
Yes. Now, moving forward with the chronology, we know that on the 2nd of July 2014, Mr. Martin attended a meeting of the CWCT Fire Group. That meeting had been arranged in order for a cross-section of industry, fire safety experts, manufacturers and academics and others to discuss various issues on which the CWCT had been receiving inquiries, including the use of composite panels such as ACM and the use of combustible insulation materials. Now, were you made aware at the time that that meeting with that CWCT group was taking place?
I don't recall.
You don't recall?
I should say that throughout 2014 and early 2015, I was almost entirely absorbed in delivering the housing standards review process, which was a very intensive process. And between 2014 and March 2016, I was still carrying 50 or 60% of my previous grade 7 workload as we tried to recruit. So there was an enormous amount of stretch during those periods.
I fully understand that, but you were co-located with Mr. Martin at this time, yes? You shared an office?
Yes.
But you weren't aware that he met with the CWCT at this time?
I may have been aware that he had gone to a meeting with the CWCT. It's much less likely that I would have been aware of the subject of the meeting. I might know he was going to a meeting, but I don't recall.
Right. In general, were you normally aware when he was undergoing meetings with industry bodies such as the BRE or an industry body like the CWCT, like a trade organisation?
I said I didn't know is probably the best answer. I didn't seek to monitor the engagement that policy leads were undertaking, and I would say that had been the case when I was a grade 7 policy lead as well. That level of engagement was largely self-directed.
Yeah. Now let's go to the minutes of that meeting. They're at CLG 3019336. These are the minutes of the meeting with the attendance list there on Wednesday the 2nd of July 2014. Do you recall ever seeing these minutes prior to the Grenfell Tower fire?
No.
Have you seen these minutes in the course of preparing your witness statement?
I am not sure whether I've seen in preparing my witness statement, but I am aware of them.
Right. Let's. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I want to look at two particular sections. If we look at the final heading on page 3 of these minutes, which is use of ACM on high-rise buildings, we can see it says ACM refers to aluminium composite material. The normal material consists of 2 skins of aluminium approximately 0.5 millimetre thick, separated by a polyethylene core 2 to 5 millimetres thick. This material generally achieves a reaction to fire classification of Class 0 or Class B S1D0. There are versions available with a mineral core which can achieve A2 S1D0. There are also similar materials available with other metals such as copper used for the facing. And then it says at the bottom, there have been major fires in buildings in various parts of the world, including the Middle East and France, where ACM materials have been used for the cladding, with the ACM responsible for external fire spread. Now, were you made aware of these discussions by Mr. Martin at any time about ACM with a PE core, which versions were available, and there being major fires in the Middle East and France where ACM had been used in the cladding?
I don't recall being made aware, no.
In July 2014, were you aware that there'd been major fires in various parts of the world involving external fire spread and ACM PE panels?
At that time, no. I think the first fire that came to my attention was later that year in Melbourne or Australia, for sure.
Yes, in November 2014, the Lacrosse fire, you mean? What about the fire at the Mermoz Tower in Roubaix in France in May 2012? Do you remember ever being aware of that?
No, I was not.
What about the external cladding fires which took place in the UAE in 2012 and 2013, which were widely reported? So those are the Al Baqa Tower, the Al Taya Tower, that's January 2012, April 2012. There's another one in October 2012, the Tamwheel Tower in November 2012, the Al Hafit Tower in April 2013. Do you ever remember discussing with Mr. Martin or anyone else in the department those 2012, 2013 cladding fires?
I don't recall. I don't recall doing so.
And when you say that you think you might have become aware a little later, it would have to be after the November 2014 of the Lacrosse building fire. How did you become aware of that?
I think it was simply through normal broadcast media reporting.
Right. Now, and do you remember ever discussing that fire with Mr. Martin, the Lacrosse fire?
I don't recall, no.
Right. Do you remember thinking, I perhaps ought to discuss this with someone to check that we've got this covered in the UK?
Actually, I think that my recollection is wrong. I may not have been aware of the Australian fire because the first time that I sought to seek further information was in the February 15.
Right, okay. Now, if we go back to the minutes and we look over the page on page 4, still under this heading, and I want to pick up it in the second paragraph down, it says, it was stated that clause 12.7 of ADB is intended to prohibit the use of polyethylene cord ACM in buildings over 18 metres, as they are not classed as limited combustibility. This is not clear from the wording of the current clause. The current clause is preceded by a heading, insulation materials / products, which implies that it only applies to insulation. The wording of the main text refers to filler materials, which could be taken to include the polyethylene core, but this is not clear. And then below that, it was suggested that clarification could be achieved by means of an FAQ. Approved documents can be downloaded from the planning portal. The page for each approved document also has an FAQ section related to that approved document. Sarah Colwell agreed to raise this with Brian Martin. Now, were you made aware by Mr. Martin following this meeting that members of the CWCT fire group had reached a consensus that the guidance in paragraph 12.7 was not clear?
No.
Were you ever made aware by Mr. Martin that it was not clearly understood by at least some in industry that the paragraph was apparently intended to prohibit the use of PE cord ACM in buildings over 18 metres?
Sorry, could you repeat that question, please?
Yes. Were you ever made aware by Mr. Martin that it was not clearly understood by at least some in industry that the paragraph 12.7 was apparently intended to prohibit the use of PE cord ACM in buildings over 18 metres?
I don't recall being made aware, no.
Do you consider that you should have been made aware of these discussions and the lack of clarity in paragraph 12.7 of the approved document as understood by those actually using the document?
Yes, I would like that to have been raised.
Yes. This was important feedback, wasn't it, that Mr. Martin, when he read these minutes, as we assume he did, would have received from industry about their understanding, yes?
Yes, it is. One thing I would note is that, and I'm not trying to split hairs, but there was often debate in industry engagement meetings about wording in an approved document. But what didn't happen was for people to actually disclose whether they knew that there was non-compliant work as a result of that happening. So people would often try to, look, I'm not trying to change this, but what I'm saying essentially is if the people in the industry knew that ACM was being used, which may well sit behind some of this, why did they not disclose that at the time, other than simply talking about the clarity of the approved document? Because that makes a big difference, because identifying ways to improve clarity of the guidance is a normal part of this engagement process, and I'm not downplaying the risk in any way in this instance. And because of the way that the approved documents were so central to and so closely controlled in terms of actual guidance that was issued, it meant that there was, across the parts, a normal process of accumulating changes until a review process happened.
Right. But let's take this in stages. It doesn't say that that product is not being used in the UK, does it?
No.
And these are all industry experts in this jurisdiction sitting down discussing this, yes?
Yes.
And we saw there was reference to the normal material in one of the paragraphs before. Can we agree that any reasonable reader of these minutes might at least suspect that ACM-PE might well be being used in the UK? You certainly wouldn't assume from this that it wasn't being used, would you?
No, I'm not trying to downplay that at all.
No. And this was very important feedback, because not only are they saying this guidance here is unclear, but it's being linked to some very significant fires internationally, yes?
Yes.
So we've got concrete evidence that that product is dangerous at height based on real-life cladding fires, and that the clauses intended to prohibit it are being said by industry to be not clear, yes?
Yes, that's the case.
Wasn't that vitally important information that Mr. Martin ought to have made you aware of straight away?
I would want it to have been escalated, yes.
Yes. Can you help us to understand how it came about that you were not informed about this?
I do not know.
Had you been made aware of this, for example, if you'd seen a copy of these minutes or been updated by Mr. Martin about these minutes and what had occurred at the meeting, would you have considered this to be a significant issue requiring escalation either to more senior officials or ministerial level?
There would have been a very serious discussion about the need for that, yes.
Yes. And what do you think, had you been made aware of this confusion and you understood the import and possible consequences of this ambiguity, what practical steps would you have taken, do you think?
We had, again, the same limited number of options that we've discussed previously, really, in terms of issuing an FAQ, looking at an urgent amendment to the approved document, which would still potentially, unless you could agree an exemption, which I don't think we ever managed to, avoid some of the process. Potentially, I'm not sure legally whether you can't modify guidance by issuing a circular letter. But those would be the kind of three mechanisms that were most readily available.
Right. Did you ever hear any discussion about the possibility of drafting or publishing an FAQ?
I don't recall that being raised with me at any time, no.
Right. Would there have been any particular difficulty or anything precluding the department from publishing an FAQ on this subject?
If it was a change in the guidance, then yes, but I'm sure I think we'd have had to take legal advice, in all honesty, because we were very much limited to performance standards rather than looking at specific material products, but I think we should have been able to do that.
Yes. I mean, here we can see from the minutes, it says it was stated that clause 12.7 is intended to prohibit the use of polyethylene cord ACM. So it would appear that that was being said to have been the intent of the clause. It's just that that's not been clearly understood by industry, yes?
Yes, but I think the wording in 12.7 is also intended to capture a whole range of other combustible filler materials at the same time, rather than listing all the various different materials that might be combustible.
Sure, but couldn't the FAQ simply have said clause 12.7 applies to the core of a composite panel?
It could have done, yes, I'm sure.
That would have been a very simple thing to do, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Now, I think we can agree that no action was taken to clarify in any formal way. There was no circular, there was no FAQ. Was the decision not to do so, not to take any action at all, one which should have rested with Mr. Martin alone and not brought to you? Or should that decision, i.e. whether or not to take some further action, have been escalated by him?
If Mr. Martin thought that there was a risk that needed to be addressed, then I would think he should have escalated it.
I see, yeah. Now, if we go back to your witness statement now, CLG 30194887, at page 17, paragraph 56, we can see you say this. You say, on the 11th of July 2014, I was sent an email chain by Brian Martin, which concerned the fact that a number of tall apartment buildings had been insulated using combustible insulation materials. The emails referred specifically to confusion about the acceptable use of and certification of Kingspan Coultham K15 rain screen board in buildings over 18 metres in height. The emails said that the National House Building Council were aware and were working with Kingspan to ascertain if there was a problem. At this time, BS 8414 testing was a valid route to compliance where combustible insulation was used. My recollection is that Brian Martin followed up on NHBC's actions relating to compliance and to obtain reassurance they were acting as we would expect a responsible building control body. Throughout my time in the department, legal advice to officials was that they should not discuss case-specific issues of compliance outside of the formal appeal and determinations process, as responsibility for compliance rested with the inspecting building control body. It was not unusual for officials to have informal discussions with external bodies where in principle concerns about compliance had been flagged to the department, and I recall having similar discussions on other issues such as accessibility and glazing safety. In other words, conversations about compliance were a normal part of the division's day-to-day business. It was, however, unusual to be involved directly in discussions about a building control body's views on compliance of specific projects given the devolved nature of the building control system. Now, let's turn to the emails you're referring to, first with the NHBC, which are at CLG 50686. Now, we can see from the top email in the chain, sent to you and Mr. Leadsom by Mr. Martin on the 11th of July 2014, that he says, see below. And what he's done is he's forwarded a short chain of emails to you. Now, can we take it from the paragraph of the witness statement, which we just read, that you did read the emails in this chain at the time?
I did, yes.
And what about the attachments attached to this email? We can see there are some attachments, included the BBA certificates for Kingspan K15. Do you remember reading those?
I do remember reviewing those, I think, at a meeting with Brian and Bob at a slightly later date.
Right. And when was that later date that you remember reading them?
I can't remember specifically. It was
Okay.
shortly after.
Now, if we go to page 2, about halfway down, there's an email sent by Mr. Martin to Neil Smith at the NHBC on the 2nd of July 2014, and that reads, "Hi Neil, I've been talking to a few folk about fire safety and facades recently. Allegedly, several buildings have been erected where PIR insulation has been used in cladding panels well over 18 metres in height. Apparently, people are under the impression that PIR is a material of limited combustibility, which it isn't. Again, allegedly, many of these buildings are blocks of flats. I've no idea how true these allegations are, but they come from relatively reliable sources. The purpose of my email is a friendly warning. You might want to double check with your inspectors and plan checkers that they are on top of this. Happy to discuss. Regards, Brian." Now, before we go to the NHBC's response, had you discussed these allegations with Mr. Martin before he sent this message? Did you know that he was communicating with NHBC over this?
No, the first time I was aware of this email chain was when it was copied to me.
Would it have been normal to CC Bob Leadsom or you into it at the time? Would you have expected that?
No, not necessarily. I think probably Mr. Martin is trying to ascertain the facts before he takes it further.
Right. So when this friendly warning email was forwarded to you on the 11th of July 2014, as we saw from the first page, was that the first time you'd heard of this?
Yes, it was, yeah.
Did you know who the relatively reliable sources were from whom this information had come to Mr. Martin?
I normally, if Mr. Martin had raised the issue before contacting NHBC, that would be a question that would be primary in your mind. But given the subsequent disclosure from NHBC, the source of the allegation was less important. But I'd assumed, I think, that it was the CWCT.
You assumed it was CWCT, I see. Did you ever ask Mr. Martin precisely who the reliable sources were from whom this information came?
No, and for the reason I've just said, that that was superseded by the nature of the disclosure from NHBC.
Right. Did you understand why this friendly warning email was sent in particular to the NHBC, and why not other building control organisations such as the LABC?
I think I understood that this was because the information provided was specific to NHBC. Certainly that was my recollection.
But
i.e. the disclosure, whoever informed Mr. Martin. I mean, my recollection of this is poor in many details, but in my mind, my recollection was that the allegation had been made that it was NHBC's inspectors that had been, someone had identified that they were using the PIR, therefore it was specific to NHBC in the first instance.
right.
But I can't.
You can't really
absolutely guarantee
recall.
that. No.
Okay. Did you understand at the time that this was a serious safety issue that Mr. Martin was raising?
yes, it was a potentially serious safety issue.
Did you or Mr. Leadsom escalate it to any more senior officials within the department?
No, we did not.
And why not?
Further correspondence followed this, and there were follow-up discussions, I believe, around whether this should be taken further. The issue was whether the systems could achieve compliance, as far as I can recall. So it was entirely possible that these systems were able to comply with the requirements of B4 if the appropriate testing was undertaken. So there was an issue about coming to terms with the outcome of that testing procedure that NHBC proposed. It's entirely the responsibility of NHBC to make a decision about compliance. So there is an issue about this being fully devolved. But my recollection is that we ultimately came to the view that the right actions were being taken to manage that risk, and we needed to wait for the results of the testing to understand if there was any need to take matters further.
Right. I think yesterday you told us you didn't know much about BS8414 testing or BR135. Does that mean that at this time, when this was brought to your attention, and I know you've only been in post for about 7 months here, you did in fact know about large-scale testing as a route to compliance?
I knew BS8414 was a very, well, my understanding at the time was that BS8414 was a very robust large-scale test, but I didn't understand the details of its mechanics or the criteria against which it was assessed.
Right, I see. Let's look at NHBC's response, which is the second email down on page 1. Here, on the 11th of July 2014, Steve Evans responds to Mr. Martin, copying in others, and he says, in the second paragraph, picking up there, the issue is in respect of the use of Kingspan Cooltherm K15 rain screen board in buildings over 18 metres in height. The confusion has arisen from Kingspan's statement that their product is acceptable for use in buildings over 18 metres. However, the product is made from a generic type of polyurethane foam, which is by nature combustible. However, since 27th of October 2008, the product held a BBA certificate attached, which indicates that it is acceptable for use in accordance with Approved Document B, Volume 2, Paragraph 12.7, subject to advice being should be sought from the certificate holder if the building exceeds 18 metres in height. It was on this basis that NHBC Building Control and other building control bodies accepted the use of K15 in buildings over 18 metres in height, including blocks of flats. We understand that LABC have also issued a registered detail approving the material for use over 18 metres. Then he goes on, in January of this year, we were made aware of a revised BBA certificate for K15 issued on the 17th of December 2013, also attached. The new certificate removed the passage which indicated it was acceptable for use in accordance with Approved Document B, Volume 2, Para 12.7, and instead states that the product will not contribute to the development stages of a fire, but that it has only been tested and therefore is only suitable for one specific construction on masonry walls. And then he goes on, as we had a number of projects under construction and in advanced stages of design utilising K15, NHBC approached Kingspan and made them aware of our concerns. As a result of this dialogue, Kingspan are currently undertaking further testing using different cladding and facade treatments in accordance with BS 8414 Part 1. The results from these tests are expected by the end of this month, and NHBC are meeting with Kingspan at the beginning of August, at which time Kingspan will be asked to provide evidence that their product can be used in an alternative construction types other than that specified in the current BBA certificate. Then over the page, There is no reason to suspect that buildings which have been built with Kingspan K15 are at risk at this time. It's just the fact that the testing carried out to date does not bear this out. Kingspan are confident that the testing currently underway will prove the suitability of the material for use over 18 metres. If they are not able to do this, we will begin the process of informing industry that the product is no longer suitable for use in facades over 18 metres, as well as informing other stakeholders such as BCA and the Fire and Rescue Service, although both parties are already aware of our ongoing discussions. So, there we have that. Now, did you read this with care when it came to you? Do you remember doing that?
I believe I did, yes.
You say in your witness statement, this is paragraph 56 on page 17, that this was followed up by Mr. Martin. You say, my recollection is that Brian Martin followed up on NHBC's actions in order to obtain reassurance that they were acting as we would expect of a responsible building control body, yes?
Yes.
Now, what else was done when you were alerted to these matters?
I believe that there was a follow-up with the BBA as well, who had issued the certificate.
If we look at page 2 again, and the paragraph that we read, if we go back to, page 1 again. And we can see from Mr. Evans's email that Kingspan were claiming that their product was suitable for use over 18 metres in a generic sense, yes?
Yes.
Despite the information in the same email that testing to date does not bear this out, yes?
Yes.
What was done by the department to address that?
We did not.
Did you contact, or did anyone else on the team contact Kingspan about that claim?
No, we didn't.
Did you carry out or cause to have carried out any checks or queries made within the industry about the product literature for Kingspan or the way in which they were marketing their K15 product for use at height?
No, we did not.
Did you contact or instruct your team to contact Trading Standards so that that authority could investigate the claims being made by Kingspan?
No.
Did you contact the Advertising Standards Authority for the same reason?
No.
Why didn't you take any of those steps?
I think this problem found us unequipped to deal with it, to be honest. I know that at this point in time, and it's not an excuse, but I know that I was heavily engaged on getting the consultation out for, I was heavily involved in the housing standards review work, which was taxing. But I just think that we were in the wrong posture. We were in terms of the way that we were working.
What do you mean by posture? Do you mean you had the wrong mindset about matters like this when they were raised with you?
I mean that our role in the sector had always been very constrained, and so when something arrived, where we've got to, in a way, is that we have gone from being a function that is not meant to be involved in any sort of direct market intervention to one that's ended up in a position of informal enforcement. You know, I'm looking back at this now.
But isn't there a difference?
Well, I'm sorry, I think let him finish. Yes, go on.
We've ended up in a position where we're under, in effectively starting to take informal enforcement, and I just I think we tried to take the right actions. I remember when we agreed a watching brief to see the test results that come back, that I genuinely felt that we were absolutely at or beyond the edge of our legal capacity to act. So I felt we were doing as much as we could genuinely. And in fact, I was worried about the implications of overstepping that remit. But I think that we were just, we were genuinely trying to do the right thing. This was an area that the department was never happy with us getting involved on other cases. So there was a sense that we might be kind of beyond the edge of what we were allowed to do, certainly in my mind. But I just think we were just totally unequipped to have the right tools and approach to deal with this in a different way.
Right. But isn't there quite a big difference between taking direct action yourself or enforcement action and notifying other important organisations that you were aware of this, given the potential life safety implications of having a combustible insulation material being used at height?
Look, this is clearly a moment of a period, an issue on which I have great regrets. I did not have any experience of that kind of activity. And this is a weak excuse, but I had no training to act as a regulator. I had no experience acting as a regulator. And what I understood we could or should do was very limited. I'd become, certainly personally, I think, and then perhaps others in the division had a very constrained mindset about what it was that we could do. So at the time, as I said, we felt we had gone as far as we could, and we had adequate reassurances with a backstop that if the testing results indicated problems, then we could revert to looking at what further might be done. But I do think we were focused on the compliance issue. Is it or isn't it compliant? And that's a determiner of whether more needs to be done. But I accept everything that you've said.
Did you, beyond the circle of you, Mr. Leadsom and Mr. Martin, did you actually take any further advice about whether or not there was more you could do? For example, did you actually take legal advice? I'm not interested in the content of it, but did you in fact take any or seek any?
No, we did not, as far as I can recall.
Did you take any advice about what you should do from anybody outside the three of you?
No.
And you said in your answer a moment ago that the department was not happy with you getting involved in other cases. What other cases are you referring to which led you to think that you needed to be so circumspect?
I can't remember the contexts. I mean, there are a couple of issues I tried to raise as a grade 7, but there were definitely instances where issues of compliance had come to the department's attention and been escalated, and the advice had always been it's a fully devolved system that rests with the building control body. So there was precedent. I even think there might have been a judicial review case at some stage in the past that had resulted from the department coming involved in a compliance decision, but I can't remember the detail. But there was certainly a kind of history of the department saying it's devolved, that is their responsibility. And I think that informed this decision to a degree, certainly to the point where you would want to know whether there was the results of the the test outcome before you might go further.
Right. Now, what contact was made with the BBA so far as you were aware? What did you understand about what had happened with the BBA?
My recollection of this is poor. I apologise for that. I understand that Mr. Martin followed up with BBA, and I think there was a meeting where we, and again, I can't remember the dates, where that information was also discussed before we went to a watching brief on this. But I can't, I don't recall the details of that correspondence from memory.
Yes. I mean, the inquiry's seen that correspondence. You and Mr. Leadsom weren't copied into that. It was between Mr. Martin and Mr. Alban. Mr. Alban explained it as an unfortunate and rare oversight. He said a review of other certificates has not confirmed it's been produced elsewhere. And he said the mistake was basically caused by human error. Do you remember anybody asking or discussing whether or not steps ought to be taken to satisfy the department that similar assertions had not appeared in other BBA certificates for other combustible products?
No, I don't recall that, but as I say, my recollection of this is very poor.
Do you remember discussing with Mr. Martin or Mr. Leadsom and Mr. Martin contacting UCAS, or the possibility that you could contact UCAS as the proper accreditation authority to ensure that UCAS was aware of these problems or errors in the BBA certificate?
I don't recall. I have a suspicion that it was considered or discussed, but I actually don't recall.
No.
So,
in effect, is this fair? You were extremely busy with other matters at the time, and it was left to Mr. Martin to follow up with the BBA and decide how far to pursue that.
So, I mean, that is, essentially. I mean, we because of our role being purposefully so distant from the market, the watching brief was not commonly agreed, but it was the normal way that we dealt with issues that were of concern but were outside our direct control. So delegating it to Mr. Martin to keep a watching brief and then escalate again if there was further concern was normal.
Right. Did you understand from Mr. Evans's email that a BBA certificate asserting that Kingspan's K15 combustible product was suitable for use over 18 metres in a generic sense had been in circulation since 2008? Do you remember picking that up in that second paragraph?
It's there in black and white, so I must have been aware of it, and I don't recognise myself in this period, frankly, and I think if circumstances had been different, I might have thought about it in a broader sense. But I think it was difficult to, at the time. I don't recall the thought process that I went through, but I'm. As I said, whatever I was thinking at the time, I do recall believing that we were going as far as we could. But I think that may be as much to do with a lack of experience in the other options or approaches that could have been taken.
Yeah. So you don't recall any discussion within your group, Mr. Leadsom, Mr. Martin, about the fact that the NHBC had apparently relied on the terms of that certificate for many years? We discussed. I know that we had follow-up meeting or more to discuss this, but I don't recall the discussions that we had, I'm afraid. Did it occur to you that other building control organisations might have done the same, i.e. rely on that BBA certificate, which had been in circulation for so long?
Yes, but the engagement that NHBC was having with the Building Control Alliance was seen as the way of engaging the sector as a whole.
And who told you that that was a satisfactory way of ensuring other building control bodies were aware? Whose opinion was that?
As I say, I think it was I don't recall the debates that we had or the discussions that we had.
Right.
But looking at it now, that would be a normal dissemination route to reach out to both sectors of the building control world.
Right. Did you read the section of Mr. Evans's email which informed you that the LABC had also published a certificate asserting that K15 was suitable over 18 metres? It's at the end of that second paragraph. We understand LABC have also issued a registered detail approving the material for use over 18 metres.
It's there in front of me, so I would have read it, yes.
Do you know whether anyone obtained a copy of that certificate?
I do not.
Do you know whether you instructed any member of your team to contact LABC about that certificate?
No, I do not.
Did anyone immediately take steps to begin to ascertain how many buildings might be affected and to identify them?
No.
Now, if we look at Mr. Martin's email to you at the top of the chain, if we go back to that, top of page 1. So he says, Richard Bob, see below. It would appear that a number of tall apartment buildings have been insulated using combustible insulation materials when perhaps they shouldn't have been. This appears to be due to an error in a BBA certificate for this type of insulation. NHBC are aware and are working with the manufacturer to see if it's a problem or not. If it is a problem, some blocks may need to have their cladding replaced. And then in brackets he says, possibly a lot of them, close brackets. I've asked NHBC to keep us informed. Now, that's a pretty clear warning, wasn't it, that there were possibly a lot of such blocks. Can you explain why thereafter nobody took any steps to establish whether there were such blocks, and if so, how many?
Again, I think the issue of understanding whether the systems could achieve compliance was or not was the trigger for thinking further on those issues. So if we had been aware that the systems weren't actually meeting or satisfying the compliance requirements, then that would have been a trigger for looking at this again. But I recognise, we would not have had, we would have had to escalate that to get resources to undertake that form of exercise, I think, and I wish we had, quite frankly.
And looking at this now, can we agree that the response of the department to this was wholly unsatisfactory?
In hindsight, absolutely. We got it wrong.
Yeah. Now, if we go briefly to an email, CLG 30148889. We can see here that on the day after the Grenfell Tower fire, on the 15th of June 2017, Mr. Martin sends to you and Mr. Leadsom the same email chain we've just been discussing from July 2014. And he says, this is connected with the BBA issue. Brian, do you see that?
Yes.
What was the context of this email? Why did he send this email to you then?
I don't recall.
Had you had a discussion with Mr. Martin on or around the 15th of June 2017 about the information you had received about the widespread use of combustible insulation on high-rise buildings 3 years earlier? Did you have that discussion with him?
Right. So, sorry. I don't recall.
You can't recall?
No. This was I can't describe quite what was happening at this point in time. It was a maelstrom.
Yes. Just looking back at your witness statement to the paragraph we looked at the beginning of this section of the questions, if we go to paragraph 56 again on page 17, you say right at the end of that paragraph, it was, however, unusual to be involved directly in discussions about a building controls body's views on compliance of specific projects, given the devolved nature of the building control system. Can we agree that this was not seeking advice about a particular project or a specific project?
No. Normally, compliance discussions were entirely theoretical. There was no indication of, how do I phrase it? Can I pause for a moment just to think about this? As I said, my feeling at that time was that we were becoming involved in informal enforcement. We were beyond where we would normally act, because this wasn't a theoretical discussion about what compliance meant. It was a discussion about whether some real buildings complied, and that was not normal.
Well, it wasn't a discussion about whether a real building complied, was it?
I said buildings.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. But it was a discussion about the widespread approval and marketing of a product on potentially many tall buildings. Can we agree that?
It is clear now that that was the case.
Yeah. Now let's go back to the minutes of the CWCT fire group meeting that we looked at before on the 2nd of July. This is CLG 3019336. And I want to look this time at a different section of the minutes. On page 3, there's a heading, combustibility of insulation, in the middle of that page. And it says underneath that heading, limited combustibility insulation should be used above 80 metres when following the prescriptive requirements of ADB clause 12.7, but other materials, principally foil-faced phenolic foam, are often used in rain screen walls. There is a degree of ignorance with some people confusing Class 0 with limited combustibility. In other cases, building control officers are permitting the use of Class 0 materials, making it difficult for cladding consultants to enforce the requirement for limited combustibility insulation. And then it goes on, higher standards of thermal insulation are requiring greater thicknesses of insulation, and in some cases this can only be achieved within the designated wall zone by use of a combustible insulation. Architects are unaware of the problem and need to allow a wider wall zone to accommodate the greater thickness required with limited combustibility material. Do you see that?
I do.
Now, that discussion is also not about a specific project. It's about an industry-wide confusion between Class 0 and limited combustibility in the context of insulation materials, yes?
It is.
Were you made aware of that confusion at any time before the Grenfell Tower fire?
I don't recall. If I was, it would have been in a context where I didn't understand the connotations.
Do you remember any discussions with Mr. Martin after the CWCT meeting about a confusion in industry over the requirements for insulation materials in external walls?
No, I don't recall any such conversation.
If Mr. Martin received a copy of these minutes, should those have been filed somewhere within the department for others to see? I mean, what ought to happen to minutes like this in terms of the department's record keeping?
There's a legal requirement on the civil service to keep all important documents, but and the division had, file servers and so on and so forth. But as with so much else that we were doing, things were not formalised or structured. So there was no standardised kind of filing system or index. We had tried to put one in place in the division, I think, in 2010, but it was not. It was overly complex and wasn't utilised properly. I'm sorry. This is again, I think, the structures and the systems and the resources were just inadequate.
Yeah. Do you accept that if you'd seen this minute or been informed about these discussions, it might have become clear to you that there was, in fact, a wider problem, not just confined to K15, but a much broader problem in the industry and also amongst building control professionals?
Yes, I think if you pull all this information together now, of course, it's very clear that there is a problem of that nature.
Well, you don't have to pull it together, do you? It's there on the face of the page. If you read these minutes, they're pretty clear, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Do you consider that you should have been informed about this matter, this confusion about insulation between Class 0 and limited combustibility, about building control officers permitting the use of materials and not enforcing the limited combustibility requirement? Do you consider that you should have been informed about that in July 2014 or shortly thereafter?
I would have wanted to be escalated, yes.
Now, you've told us in paragraph 56 of your witness statement that Mr. Martin followed up with the NHBC. What did he tell you about what had happened when he followed up again with the NHBC? Were you given a formal report back from him?
No, I don't believe so.
So did you simply assume that if Mr. Martin didn't get back to you, the issue had been resolved?
That was the way that the watching brief tended to work. Yeah.
Were you made aware that Steve Evans of the NHBC had updated Mr. Martin on the 15th of August 2014 in summary to say that Kingspan had carried out 2 further tests and the full results of those would be available within the next 2 months?
I don't recall, but as this period went on, my recollection in general gets worse.
Right. If we go to some minutes now of a meeting, if we go to CLG 1306889, these are minutes of a BCA technical liaison group meeting held later that year in December 2014. Did you ever get to see minutes of meetings like this?
So I think that minutes were circulated to me, or I've received emails from BCA about some of their work.
Yes. Now, in fact, we can see, if we look at an email, CLG 1306884, that these minutes were in fact sent to you in April 2015, together with an agenda for the next meeting. It's got, dear all, papers for tomorrow's meeting, and you're copied in on that. You're one of the recipients of that email. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that, you can take it from me, included the minutes of this meeting and the agenda for the next meeting. What did you do if we go back to the minutes, did you read these minutes when they were sent to you, or only if someone drew your attention to something within them?
Bob Ledson and I discussed on a number of occasions whether we should have formal engagement with the BCA, but we didn't. We didn't have the resources to do it, and we never decided to engage. So these were sent to me, and I would perhaps have a look at the broad scope of them, but I did not have the time to consume all of the information. It was a capacity issue. It was something that was so I frequently not read the papers that were sent through. They're often quite lengthy.
Yeah. If we just look at page 4 of these minutes and item 12.0 on page 4, we can see the notes of the minutes read, use of combustible materials in cladding systems to buildings over 18 metres. SE, that's Steve Evans, outlined the work carried out to date in identifying possible solutions to allowing polyurethane type insulation materials to be used in cladding systems over 18 metres. And then it's got SE, Steve Evans, and BT, Barry Turner, to discuss further outside of the meeting, confirmation of any actions to be fed back to the group. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Now, would you agree that just reading these notes and taking them at face value, it appears to indicate that the BCA were working with Steve Evans of the NHBC centrally involved, not to limit, but to allow the use of polyurethane type insulation materials to be used on buildings over 18 metres?
Well, there was a legitimate route to compliance at that time as far as we were concerned. So working to establish which systems would comply with that would not seem unusual.
Are you talking about the BS 8414 route to compliance, the large-scale testing?
Well, that's what I assume would be behind the work to establish whether that was acceptable.
Yes, but were you aware at the time that that couldn't confer any form of generic acceptability of use of the product and could only ever tell you that that specific system tested met the BR135 criteria?
Yes, I understood it was system specific.
Yes. So did you understand that if you've got many buildings with this insulation on, unless all those buildings are absolutely identical, you would have to have quite a number of 8414 tests? Do you agree? Did that occur to you at the time?
It didn't occur to me at the time, no.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chairman, I think that is, well, sorry, I've gone 2 minutes over, but if we could stop there for lunch, that's a good moment.
We should. Mr. Harral, we're going to stop there now so we can all have some lunch. We'll resume at 2 o'clock, please. And no discussing your evidence over the break, please.
Thank you, sir.
All right? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. 2 o'clock, please. Thank you.